Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tuzinkewich as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
Well, welcome back. This episode is part 2 of our current mini-series on the 3 inflection points that all businesses must master to achieve durability and long-term growth. And in this episode, we're going to dive into the first inflection point related information, which is about the innovation phase. And for those of you who are new to this Boosting Business Value podcast, and why should you be new? You've probably been binging all of our prior episodes, for crying out loud. I'm David Gruder, the business lifecycle, exit planning, and post-acquisition psychologist for Blue Sky Business Resources. And with me, as always, is my trusty foil, sidekick, and thought leader, many capacities, Jason Tuzinkewich, who is Blue Sky's Chief Operating Officer. Take it away, Jason.
All right. Well, Doctor, it's great to be with you again. And, I mentioned this in part 1, but I'm so excited about this series because this is some important stuff. And we're going to dig pretty deeply into innovation in this episode. But first, let's kind of back up a little bit and let's talk about what do we mean when we say these inflection points that business owners and their teams need to master, and what specifically are those inflection points? So, the way that we're talking about it right now is that inflection points are major functional pivot points. This is a time where, if you're looking at it on a plot, the graph goes from pretty flat to straight up. This is where strategy, organization, tactics, and leadership style requirements must change in order to succeed at what's next. And it's a perpetual cycle. In durable businesses, there are these 3 points that you just keep encountering over and over and over again in your life. And that's why it's so important to master them. And so what are these 3? We already mentioned innovation. This is where things start. Then we go to fruition. This is where things really grow, expand, and penetrate markets. And then you get to bifurcation. And bifurcation is, to quote the term penned by one of my professors, Dr. Tushman, it's when the business has to become ambidextrous. It's when it's doing both innovation and fruition simultaneously, which is, the most cumbersome, the most troubling point for business owners, and where a lot of businesses fail and languish. So, we're going to talk about all 3 of these in this mini series. And so, Doctor, let's kick off this innovation phase. Let's get the business started.
Well, let's do it. So what happens during the innovation stage? Well, it's probably pretty obvious that in this phase in innovation, we're creating something new that the market wants. So that might be a need or a capacity to fill a need. There's something new that's emerged that is a need that hasn't really existed so much in the marketplace up until now, and where your business actually has the capacity to fill that need in some form. So that's one thing that the market might want in the way of something new.
And it's so exciting that we're in a time where technology is advancing so quickly that these new needs, these brand new market potentials are coming at us at a really rapid pace. So there's all this opportunity to do that. And then the other one is when the need exists, but the market is it's unmet. People are businesses, or whoever the buyer is not finding what they're seeking. And so they know that there's a need. The need has existed for a while, but there hasn't been a product or a service delivered that satisfies that need.
Absolutely. And another situation that calls for innovation is where the need exists, and it's been filled in some manner up until now, but the marketplace, the buyers are now needing a next evolution beyond what is already available to them.
Yeah. And, just kind of piggybacking on that, a lot of times this happens when an industry grows and starts tapping into that newly created capacity. And now the needs that they've had met by some product or service need to be specialized to service their new performance goals. And so it's again that it's kind of that evolution, but it's narrowing the focus into something that is tailored or bespoke to these newly emerging needs.
Right, and not just newly emerging needs, but specialized versions of what's already available that have been customized for a specific sub niche, a specific marketplace, rather than a generic version. And then, of course, where there is an existing need, and it's being met pretty well, yet a new sub need emerges where buyers are wanting that product or service delivered in a different way than it's currently available.
Yeah, I think about I use Microsoft Office all the time, and I used to use it on my PC, but now I want to use it on my tablet. I want to use it on my laptop and on different operating systems. So, you see this all the time in a lot of different products and services where the delivery method changes over time, and there's a lot of room for innovation in there. And then the last one, as we always talk about with businesses, we talk about how do businesses compete, right? They compete on timing, on price, and on quality. You can only ever do two, right? And so the one thing that we haven't talked about in innovation, but that is crucial, is getting to that point where you can compete on price, where you can deliver a fundamentally different price point in some way, shape, or form to satisfy the existing need. And that's another innovation that in many ways has disrupted a lot of our markets recently.
And it's going to disrupt our markets even more in coming years as robotics starts to take over certain repetitive tasks that up until now humans have done. And when that happens, there will probably be different price points for those same products. And with any luck at all, the price points will be lower, and the people who used to do those jobs will hopefully be retrained by the company to fill other roles that will be available for them to fill, because they're not doing that kind of grunt work that robots can do.
I love your optimism. Let's see that happen.
It is an optimistic viewpoint, and I'm not saying it will happen that way. I'm saying I want it to happen that way.
I'm along with you. And with our experts in business and advisory that listen to this podcast, we can generate a community that can ensure that can happen, because it's feasible to retrain and replace and upskill your employee staff so that you don't have to go find new employees as technology changes the demand from a production focus to a creative thought and problem solving focus.
Right. And I think the footnote that I want to add there just feels important to me to insert is that this has always been true in the business world. There's always a period where a new innovation comes online and it completely disrupts the job market. What's available in the job market, when certain jobs vanish, new jobs emerge. That is always occurring in each evolution in the marketplace. So what we're talking about here specifically with AI and robotics is happening now, but the basic dynamics we're talking about have always happened and will always continue to happen. So if you're getting wigged out by that, I think what's more important is to ask yourself, what's your next evolution in your capacities to fill certain roles and certain jobs as needs change? in a business.
Yeah, and we've stepped a little bit off the beaten path and onto a little bit of a soapbox here, but I do want to add one more thing to this because this is important stuff. It's also historically proven and true to this day that as technology improves and makes certain tasks and job titles obsolete, more job titles emerge.
Yes.
The increase of automation and robotics has created a lot more job titles in technical thought, in design, in programming, in process management, all of those things, than it took away in frontline production. And
Right.
so as long as we keep that in mind and we recognize and we look for the growth areas, then it's easier to determine how to retrain people and make them fit.
Right. So don't listen to the doomsayers who are saying the sky is falling around this. The sky is not falling. It's always the marketplace. The business world has always evolved in ways where jobs that used to exist cease to exist, and new jobs that never existed come on board and are needed, and people need to fill those new jobs.
That was a fun little side trip.
It was. It was, and a really important one, I think.
I
We
agree.
could probably devote a whole episode to that, but that's something to consider for another time. So in the innovation phase, the thing that's built in to innovation is that by definition, it is a phase that's high loss, high burn rate, because what you're innovating hasn't been monetized yet. It hasn't been brought to the market. It's not generating revenue, let alone profits, because you're developing it. And so by definition, the innovation phase is a phase where you are going to have a burn rate. You're going to be losing money, or let's just say you're going to be funneling, if you're an existing business, you're going to be funneling profits, a portion of your profits, into something new that's not yet monetizing. So we're going to return to that as we unpack this a little bit further, because the fact that that's so requires a certain kind of vetting before jumping in with both feet with a new innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. And to just kind of build onto that, everything about this phase is dynamic. It's in high flux. And, you kind of look at this juxtaposed against the fruition phase, where it's all about streamlining and systematizing and making continuity and consistency. This is the exact opposite of that. You're changing, that concept of failing forward and failing forward fast is tantamount to success in the innovation phase. You've got to fail fast because you've got to quit pursuing things that aren't going to work, but your failures have to move you forward to getting to that product that you can monetize and sell. But not only is the design process dynamic, the communication process, the resource allocation process, all of these things are changing throughout. So, if you think about the two major long-term functional phases of a business, the innovation and the fruition phase, innovation is all about rapid dynamics, a lot of change, a lot of turnover, always being flexible and being able to pivot quickly. Whereas the fruition phase, as we'll talk about in the next episode, is all about not pivoting, not changing, getting that, you can optimize, but you're not going to make major fundamental changes in communication structure, in positional responsibilities, or in the product itself.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well said. And basically, the punchline from that is that even in an existing business, when an existing business moves into a new innovation phase, they have to think like a startup. They have to think like early stage entrepreneurs. And there's actually a term for that in the business world. It's called being an intrapreneur rather than an entrepreneur, where you are bringing entrepreneurial mindsets and innovative mindsets that are part of the startup mindset into an existing business during an innovation phase. So it calls for entrepreneurship in an existing company. And of course, because of the nature of what innovation requires, while you're innovating, there's going to be all kinds of cross-functionality, matrix communication. All of those are essential. And the important thing is that the way that an innovation team operates always supersedes hierarchical structures in the main business if it's an existing business that's going into its next innovation phase. The innovation team cannot be constricted by the status quo hierarchical structures inside of the innovation team. Obviously, they have to interface with the executive team and the existing hierarchical structures, but that's external to the innovation group. Inside the innovation group, all bets are off. Chaos, in a positive sense of chaos, is not only welcome, it is necessary.
Yeah, I like that. I like that structured chaos concept, and all bets are off to a point, as long as they're failing forward and as long as they're driving towards something that's monetizable. Absolutely. There do need to still be some guardrails on here, but they're a lot wider than they are in the normal operation of a existing, mature business.
Yes. And go ahead. It occurs to me to have you add something, actually. I think what cross-functionality is going to be clear to our listeners, but for our listeners who aren't familiar with the term matrix communication, can you define that?
Yeah. So, if you think about a business and you think about the way that, you in your business communicate with your team, typically the team, the specific functional team communicates amongst themselves. Engineers talk with engineers, sales and marketing people talk with sales and marketing people. Sometimes the sales and the marketing people don't even communicate that much. But you've got it's almost silo. You talk within your teams horizontally and you talk vertically to your higher ups and to the people you require things from, further down the process chain. But in matrix communication, you need the inclusion of a sales and marketing person. You need the inclusion of an engineer. You need the inclusion of somebody on the plant floor, because all of their input is critical. What you can design that you love, it is great for you, but if you can't sell it and the sales and marketing team recognize that there's not a market for what you're building, then don't make it. But, if the marketing team is there and they have a voice at the table, then they can maybe say, there's not a market for that product in this, but if you made these tweaks and changed this functionality, we know there's a huge market just horizontal to it. And so having that ability to communicate directly across all the silos and divisions is what matrix communication is all about. And in order to do it effectively, there needs to be a point of contact in each place, and those lines of contact need to be clearly defined so that you're maintaining a clear flow of knowledge, the transparency, but also not redoubling efforts or getting conflicting orders. And go.
Let me just use a quick analogy to drive this home. There is traditionally a competitive attitude, actually disdainful attitude that architects and builders have toward each other. And architects are creating a design that a builder is going to build. So when an architect is in the brainstorming phase, in the initial parts of innovation, that it would be premature for them to be talking to builders. But once they've got a clear sense of what their creativity is giving birth to, if they then don't go to the builders to find out what is and isn't actually implementable in their brilliant creative process, then they'll end up with an architectural design that falls into a category that I call true but not useful. It may be true in terms of creativity, but it's not buildable. It's not useful. So this is a metaphor for what is often missing during the innovation phase in any business. At some point in the creative process, you've got to go to the salespeople to see if this is sellable. You've got to go to the production people, the delivery people, to see if this is deliverable. And if it's not in the form you've initially brainstormed, then what tweaks will you have to make so that what you're innovating can actually be profitized?
Absolutely. Well said. And I love your analogy, because I will tell you that 2 weeks ago, I was at a parade of homes and I walked through this house. It was gorgeous, beautiful layout, beautiful, everything was very nice, except there were 6 thresholds in the building, in one house, 6 thresholds where they couldn't mount doors because they just didn't work. They didn't fit. And I'm like, you have such a nice house, but 2 of those thresholds were on one bathroom. So there was one bathroom that had 2 doorways that couldn't have doors on them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
So that's the exact failure of matrix communication.
It's a beautiful example. I mean, unfortunately, I only know, I have one of our nieces is an architect with a builder's mindset. And one of my longtime friends and colleagues is a builder with an architect's mindset. And it's that cross fertilization that makes projects successful.
Mm-hmm. They work together like peanut butter and jelly.
Yep.
All right. So moving on. Let's touch real briefly on some things, and we're not going to belabor this strictly because the next episode will really drive these points home. Mm-hmm. But let's spend just a couple seconds on what doesn't happen during the innovation phase, things that are specifically excluded from innovation phase success. And the first one of those is managing margins. And this comes up because, again, innovation phase is something you have to keep going into. And when you're a startup, it makes perfect sense. When you're a startup, it's obvious you're not driving margins until you can sell a product. It's when you're in a going concern that is shifting into that bifurcation phase where it's innovating and running a business, where managing margins becomes part of the mindset that carries over and should not.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the other thing that doesn't happen during the innovation phase is production optimization. Yes, at some point in the innovation process, you're going to be consulting with the people who will be responsible for producing what you're innovating after you've done your initial brainstorming and envisioning and all of that juicy initial creativity. So yes, you'll consult with them, but you're not in the innovation phase focused at all on production optimization. You're not optimizing the product or service that you're innovating yet. Well, actually, you might be optimizing the product or service that you're going to be bringing to the market, but what you're not optimizing is how it's going to get produced, how it's going to get sold, how it's going to get marketed, how it's going to be delivered. That's for the next phase. That's not for the innovation phase.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So big challenges and solutions for navigating the innovation phase. So let's touch first on innovation inflection point challenges and navigation. So you've already mentioned one of those huge challenges and solutions, which is when you're in the innovation phase, you've got to set aside status quo addiction and, the way we've always done things and all of that, that mindset, and replace it with the capacity to creatively fail forward, just like you mentioned earlier, Jason.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, this capacity is twofold, right? The individual that's innovating at any given point in this process has to be able to be wrong, but the rest of the team, the innovation team, as well as the leadership team guiding this, has to be able to not punish when people are wrong. The mistakes need to be yes, that didn't work. What did we learn? Versus that didn't work and it cost us this much. What are you doing? And that's a really big issue. And so I'm glad you put that at the forefront. And then the other thing, it's kind of piggybacking on this, right? Because we're saying you have to be able to make mistakes. You have to be able to throw something away if it's not working, but you also have to maximize limited resources. You're not going to have the full bank account of a going concern. If you're a startup, you've got what you've got in your bank account, right? Maybe a couple investors, but you really have to prove something out before you can get big investors. And then, you also don't have the manpower. With a startup, you have to build your team, right? And you don't have a lot of money to pay. So who's going to buy into this vision and jump on board for limited pay, trusting in the success that comes? And then, your limited resources of infrastructure, of equipment, all of those things. You're either starting from a clean sheet or from a smaller swimming pool than a business that's in fruition. And so the ability to make the most out of every single dollar, every single person, and every single piece of equipment and technology that you have is crucial in this phase, because again, there's no revenue coming in to support your losses.
That's right. There's only the amount of money that you've allocated for the innovation. So another challenge and solution really is focus, as we've already said, so I'm not going to belabor this, on extreme cross-functionality. Siloing has no place during innovation. The sky's the limit. The what about blank? What if blank? Not as a way of putting down a new idea or a new innovation, but as a way of really fleshing out that potential innovation to do viability vetting. So, I'm a real fan of blue skying without those kinds of what ifs.
Me too.
And that's right. And I'm a fan of recognizing when you have been creative to the point where you now need to vet the viability of the thing that you're imagining. You're exercising your creative juices to brainstorm into potential existence. Does it deserve to come into potential existence? And that's why cross-functionality is so important, because the ability to think through different lenses, through wearing different hats in looking at the viability of what you're innovating is crucial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has to work. It has to be producible. It has to have a market, and it has to be able to be made for a profit. And
Yes.
So at the end of the day, when you've got a great idea, it has to be proven against those four things. And ideally, you'll have a scope of work that will put the sandbox around those four things in the beginning, so that you're not just throwing darts with a blindfold on.
Agreed.
And so, all of this, the one thing, like the most critical element to success in all of this, before you create your cross-functionality, before you start working on matrix communication, or even allocating any money, is that there must be a clear and inspiring vision that the innovation team and the executive team have bought into. It'd be great if the whole team buys into it, but at the very least, the functional innovation team and the leadership team that holds the purse strings have to buy into this clear, inspiring vision. Without the inspiration, your team's going to burn out and the executive team will lose interest, which means you'll lose funding. Without the clarity, you won't be able to prove success, and you won't have a rudder to guide you in the right direction. So it has to be both.
Mm-hmm. Well said, and very, very important. That is utterly mandatory. So what we're going to do in the final part of this podcast before we move into takeaways and closing is we want to unpack the specifics of the two different types of innovation cycles that can occur. The first is innovation for the first time around, meaning in a startup. So there's the startup innovation phase, and then there is the innovation phase inside an existing business. So we'll start with innovation in startups.
Awesome. Yeah. And, we've talked about a lot of these points that we're going to discuss because many of them overlap, but they have different weights if you're in a startup than they do if you're innovating within a going concern. And the biggest one is the resource maximization. It's always important, but in a startup where you're clean sheet, you don't have a building or, any kind of equipment, you don't have a full team yet, you don't have, something generating cash flow that you can draw from. It's all about resource maximization. Every single person has to be able to be worth twice their role's capacity. Every single dollar that's spent has to be worth at least $100 in normal term parlance. And every single piece of equipment has to have multiple uses because you're so tight. You have so few resources in all of these areas that everything has to deliver.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can't emphasize that enough. And the punchline with that is that even extremely well-funded startups are still starting from zero with building their offerings and their infrastructure. And there are a lot of expenses. That's why this whole notion that everyone who's in the startup world knows about, called burn rate, has to be carefully monitored. What a burn rate is the speed at which you're burning through the funding that you've gotten to get the startup off the ground. And if you run out of your startup funding before you've accomplished what that phase of startup funding is allocated for, then you're sunk before you even get out of the starting gate.
So true. And I could tell you horror stories of great companies, great startups that have gone out to the investor world, raised some capital, but weren't paying attention to their burn rate. And so they would raise this capital, they'd make a bunch of progress, make a bunch of moves, then they'd stall out because they ran out of money and they have to go raise another round. You do that once, it's bad. You do it more than once, and none of those investors are coming back to you. And so paying attention to this is extraordinarily important. Whether it's your money or whether it's investors' money, it doesn't matter. You need to always have surplus money in the startup game because, again, there's no cash flow to back it up. And then moving into, that's the startup phase, specifically businesses that are starting up clean sheet. Now let's talk about the more common and more frequent failure point for businesses, which is when you're innovating within an existing business. And the big reason why businesses have such a hard time from this is because they need to break away from the bureaucracy and existing norms of the fruition phase. Most people don't like constant change. Most people don't thrive in the chaotic, dynamic environment of innovation. For those people who are the majority of your team members, it's really easy to fall into the comfort of the inertia of the fruition phase because it's all about systems and processes and consistency and clearly defined metrics. So not only do you know when you walk into the office what you're going to do for the entire day, but you also know how to track your success. It's very regimented, it's very clear, and it's very consistent. And that's antithetical to good innovation. So once you've been successful in that inertia, in that consistency, letting a group of rogues break away and disregard all of that makes you profitable in order to create something new is really, really tricky. And so that's the thing that I think, and we mentioned before, becoming ambidextrous is something that is really hard for businesses to do successfully.
Mm-hmm. And just to tie in to what you're saying, something that we've already touched on in this episode, the existing businesses, when you're bifurcating and you're continuing to do the existing business while innovation is going on, there does need to be a certain amount of deliberate siloing where the innovation team is somewhat, never completely, because there are still financial constraints and logistical and coordination constraints and all of that. But to some extent, they need to be siloed off from the existing business's functions so that they can really engage in the creative innovation process, so that they can move into that mindset that's a failing forward mindset, the mindset that is not about stewarding cash flow, but instead a mindset that says, we're in negative cash flow in our innovation process, and we need to pull out all the stops in our brainstorming. But at some point in that brainstorming process, we have to come back to the real constraints in terms of economic viability of what we're innovating. So a certain degree of healthy siloing of the innovation team, not full siloing, but a degree of siloing, is really important in an existing business when it's bifurcating.
Absolutely. And, it always occurs to me that the other part of this ambidexterity and this creating space piece that you're talking about, shareholders hate innovation. They want innovation. They want the results of innovation. They don't like the growing pains of innovation. So part of all of this is creating that space from the shareholders and saying, hey, they're off limits because they're doing what in 2-3 years, you're going to be patting them all on the backs for the money they're putting into your stock value. Give them that space. And this is where that clear and inspiring vision becomes really important, right? But then the other part of this is the guardrails on the sandbox, right? There's still only so much money that can, should, and will be allocated for innovation. And so there are two sides to this, right? Allocated money for innovation must be sacrosanct. It must be committed to the innovation and not allowed to be diverted by anybody within the cash flow stream into things that they think are more important. It can't be renegotiated after it's been allocated because something else came up that we want the money for. It has to be dedicated, but the innovation team also has to understand that they don't have a blank check to innovate from. They have to be focused. They have to be diligent and methodical in failing forward and testing their innovations to ensure that there's a pathway to profitability in a reasonable time frame.
Yes, beautifully said. And the last thing is about cross-functional productivity, to tie this back in with what we were saying earlier. Cross-functional productivity in service of innovation is trickier in an existing company than in a startup, because in a startup, everyone's in cross-functionality mode. In an existing company, what you've done for the sake of bearing fruit and optimization in the second phase is people have been siloed to an extent. In other words, they become specialized. Your CFO thinks like a CFO. Your operations person thinks like an operations person, et cetera, et cetera. They're not cross-functional. And yet, in the innovation process, unless you're blessed with being in a company that has a standing, ongoing R&D department, the shift in mindset out of being focused on one aspect of the company, on marketing and sales or on production or whatever it is that you've been focused on, that has to go out the window if you're part of an innovation team. What you've been used to in the way of specialized thinking and specialized responsibilities and specialized advocacy on behalf of the part of the company's functioning that you're operating inside of has to be tossed out. You have to go back into entrepreneurial mode, into that cross-functional thought process and productivity that is not what you've been used to in the prior phase in an ongoing company.
So true. It's so well said. And, this brings up a really important point, which is even if the business has done a great job of separating out an innovative team, allowing them the freedom from operating metrics and performance metrics and allowing them the space and the adequate resources to do their design and innovation work, there will be a time where that innovation team requires resources from the parent company. And so think about this. You've designed a product. You're very excited about this product, but before you can do any real market research or perfect the design for manufacture, you have to do a trial run of manufacture. But if your plant manufacturing floor leader gets paid a bonus on productivity, stopping the line, doing a changeover, and running a limited run of something that doesn't generate revenue hurts his metrics and his or her ability to get the maximum bonus. And so at that point, the executive team, this is where the executive team, again, has to be involved and engaged in this, has to be able to provide a new incentive for those members of the team outside of the innovation team that may or may not buy into this new innovation, but provide appropriate incentives to support it anyway. And so that they're not being hurt by this innovation or even allowed to perceive harm because of the innovation. And so when you're talking about this cross-functionality, it becomes an even bigger deal when the innovation becomes mature and has to start being cross-functional within the rest of the organizational team. And so on that note, let's move on to the key takeaways. I think that we've got two big ones, and it's been a while to get here, but I think it's important. I really appreciate all of your insights, Doctor. This has been a great conversation.
And
for
yours.
me, the biggest takeaway is that innovation in a startup is really, really hard, but the people in a startup are expecting it. They come into a startup with this bootstrap mentality. They're creating something they're excited about. In bifurcation, where most mature businesses fail, it happens because they have that difficulty breaking away from the norms, procedures, and hierarchy that make the fruition phase so successful. And so innovation is hard in and of itself, but it gets a multiplicative effect of difficulty and challenge inside a going concern, where we're pushing against comfort and profitability and success in order to innovate what's next.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And then the other key takeaway is don't enter into innovation mode until you have the necessary vision for what's being innovated and why it's being innovated, the support for the innovation process, and a way to evaluate the viability of what your initial creative brainstorming generates before jumping in with both feet. Unless you've got those components, don't even bother innovating. It's going to be a money suck without a return.
Absolutely. And on that cheerful note, thank you so much for joining us in this episode. We hope that you learned something. We hope that it helps guide your thinking in your business to a more successful and more valuable position. On behalf of Dr. Gruder and myself, we'd love to have you subscribe. Click the subscribe button, make some comments, give us your feedback, tell us what you like, what you don't like, and give us some thoughts about what you'd love to hear us talk about in the future. Also, please visit the Blue Sky website. You can find all of our episodes. You can find the video, the audio, and the transcript of all of our podcasts there at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. And also, you can find some really great free tools to assess the strategic health and the infrastructure viability of your business. They're micro surveys. They take less than 5 minutes to fill out each. Each one will give you actionable results and some findings that you can take to your business right away and put to work. And so check those out. We'd love to hear what you think about those as well. That's it. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the next episode where we talk about the fruition phase.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.